Hello, my friends. So glad to have you back for more scripture study. We are building off what we started last week. We're still in Kirtland. We studied last week section 46, 47, 48. Today we've got 49 and 50. Two revelations, but similar things in terms of what they're trying to help the saints guard against. 46, if you remember last week, was all about gifts of the Spirit. Well, it was about church and the fact that all visitors are welcome. Everybody has spiritual gifts, so bring them. But there's always a danger of over-swinging pendulums, right? You know me, proving contraries. Always looking for Goldilocks zones. And the dangers of virtues taken to the extremes, in which case they turn into vices. If you think about revelatory tyranny on the one hand and revelatory anarchy on the other, we're trying to find some balance in the middle. And so the thought of, no, you're not welcome in church, it's only for the obviously saved. It's like, no, that's too closed. But to turn it so open that people can bring in falsehood and pass it off as truth, that's going to be a problem too. To think that nobody has spiritual gifts, that's a problem at one extreme. But to think that everyone someone claims to be from God is a legitimate spiritual gift, that's overswinging the pendulum in the opposite direction. So what we're going to see today in 49 and 50 is, how do we find truth amidst the error? How do we recognize true spiritual gifts from perhaps some counterfeits or true spiritual manifestations? If you remember what we talked about from section 46, that there are some things that are doctrines of devils and other things that are commandments of men. Those are two wrongs as opposed to the right, which is truth from God. And so as the saints are trying to learn how to recognize that truth, section 49 and 50 are going to help them along those lines. Okay, hopefully they help us along the same lines ourselves. Now, 49 is going to be a message specifically about Shakerism. And if there's one thing that doesn't sound very relevant in the 21st century, it's the challenges of Shakerism. For this one, we're going to have to rewind the clock and go back to the 1830s, when Shakerism was at its height. This was a religion that had started in England, come to the United States in the early American years. Anne Lee was considered to be a female reincarnation, basically, of Jesus. First coming, God is going to send his son, and the second coming, he's going to send his daughter. That Christ will be the male manifestation, and then Anne Lee, the female manifestation. And so because she already came, the second coming has already come. And now they're living in this period where kind of preparing for the end of all things. And yet this kind of heaven on earth that they've created communitarily. Shakerism was big as far as let's all live under one roof. And yet, with all of that communitarian style living, it was also a celibate communitarianism because they didn't believe in marriage. There's going to be some interesting differences between Latter-day Saints and Shakers, as you can probably already guess. But what's interesting during this time period, about for the 1820s to the 1860s, is when Shakerism is strongest. In fact, it was growing to the point that there was also growing opposition to them. Yes, there's even anti-Shakerism that I've studied before as part of my understanding of anti-religious rhetoric. There's no more anti-Shakerism now, because basically there's no more Shakerism now. They're down to one or two living members of the faith that remain. But during Joseph Smith's period, they were on the rise. And not just on the rise numerically, but in some ways on the rise spiritually. Later on in the 1830s, this is still early, but later on in the 1830s, it'll be this period called the era of manifestations. And there's all kinds of spiritual gifts that the Shaker community is claiming for themselves and feeling that these are gifts of God that he is showering down upon the faithful. Now, Joseph Smith and the rise of the Church of Christ is coinciding with this same period among the Shakers. And in fact, there are Shaker communities that started in New England and New York and are now spreading down into Ohio and that area. Well, the Latter-day Saints in some ways are on the same kind of move. And so very close to Kirtland, there is a town or a community called North Union. And the union signifies the union that the Shakers are trying to develop among themselves. Now, there's a man named Lehman Copley who has been leaning in the Shaker direction, believes in some of their doctrines, though not all of them. And by this time, he's joined the Church of Christ. And Joseph Smith receives a revelation for him and anyone else that's wondering Where do we come down on Shaker beliefs? That's section 49. And then section 50 is a more broad one, not to a specific religious community or denomination themselves, but rather in general, how do I discern between truth and error, especially as far as spiritual gifts are concerned? If you remember back to the first vision, Joseph Smith in this period of revivalism he went to all these revivals as often as he could. And at one point he even said, I wanted to get religion the way they did, where people would faint in the aisles. There were all kinds of visible manifestations when people felt that they'd been slain by the Spirit, for example, and were dropping dead. Well, Joseph wanted to get religion in the same way, and yet he said, I couldn't. Something felt off. Like, is this more performative rather than a legitimate, sincere response to some spiritual call? Hard to say. What's coming from God? What's coming from man? What's coming from the adversary? Truths and fictions, counterfeits as well as real things. Section 50 is going to be some counsel to the saints on how they navigate those possibilities here as the church is just getting underway. Important things then, beyond specifics about Shakers and 19th century American revivalism, we're going to have different falsehoods and philosophies to navigate in our day, but very similar principles that will guide us in how to navigate that correctly. Okay, so I'm hoping that what we see this week in section 49 and 50 will be blessings to us so that we can hold on to the truths of God and be able to avoid the falsehoods that surround us. With that in mind, let's dive into section 49 first and talk about the Shakers for a while. Now, if you go through, the section heading is really helpful to spell out some of the beliefs of the Shakers that are then responded to in section 49. In some ways, the section heading will provide some of the questions, and then the content of the revelation itself will provide some of the answers. We're not going to go through all of them, but let me start today with more of a broad picture on how we're going to lay claim to truth and how we're going to refute whatever falsehood may be out there. For this one, let me start with this question. And for some of you returned missionaries, maybe you'll have experiences along these lines. Have you ever been in a Bible bash? I mean, when it's kind of throw down and I've got a proof text and you've got a proof text and they say the Bible says and we say, no, the Bible here says, and pretty soon we're going back and forth based on biblical grounds, but it's a biblical battleground. Now, if you've ever been a part of a Bible bash, perhaps you've learned what I learned, that you lose even when you win. You understand? You might win, quote unquote, the argument, but the fact it was an argument that got contentious, you lost the Spirit, for example. You lost a possible friend and conversation partner. You probably lost the chance to convert because you were too focused on contending instead. Most Bible bashes I know do not end in conviction or conversion. They end in contention. And the two parties parting ways with some antipathy toward the other. That's the problem. If you see what Jesus taught over and over and over in 3rd Nephi, these are good people with important questions, trying to establish true doctrine. But the fact that they had devolved into disputation and that had gone into contention, which is of the devil, that's where the Lord drew the line. Yes, find orthodoxy, establish truth, but do it with harmony all the way through. Now, that's going to be key as these Latter-day Saints are being taught about Shaker doctrine. If you look at what's going on in section 49, verse 1, hearken unto my word, my servants Sidney, that's Sidney Rigdon, and Parley, that's Parley P. Pratt, and Lehman, that's Lehman Copley. For behold, verily I say unto you, that I give unto you a commandment, that ye shall go and preach my gospel, which ye have received, even as ye have received it unto the Shakers. So there they are, this trio being sent on this mini mission. North Union is a Shaker settlement, not too far away from Kirtland. So make it a day trip. Go and spend a weekend. Go share the gospel to the Shakers. Now, the fact that these three missionaries are identified, let's identify them a little more deeply. And let me put them in perspective as far as the kind of personalities that they're bringing to the table when they're teaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, Sidney Rigdon was a very well-read, well-educated, well-spoken minister. He'd been a Baptist minister, became a Campbellite minister, and now he's a Latter-day Saint minister. But he knows the Bible backwards and forwards, okay? He's been helping Joseph Smith with the Joseph Smith translation. He was called to prove the prophet's words based on what's already in Scripture. Ooh, that sounds like proof texting to me. Is he going to be prone to that kind of proof texting? Is he going to be a Bible basher since he knows the Bible so well? We'll see. Next, you have Parley P. Pratt, and we love Parley P. Pratt. He was one of the great missionaries of this dispensation, and yet he was fiery. Now, that has some pros and some cons, okay? Superpower and kryptonite all rolled into one, and he had a great sense of humor. That can be a positive and a negative as well. He was full of zeal, and when that gift gets a little extreme, it becomes overzealous, and that can be a problem. And then Lehman Copley, he had been a shaker, at least believing some of those beliefs. And now he's a Latter-day Saint, called to go back to his own people. Is he going to be empathetic and understanding? Is he going to be over the top and tell them how wrong they are, admitting that he had been wrong as well? Again, if you're a convert from a former faith, how do you respond to members of that faith that you used to be a part of? That can be a positive bridge building experience, or it can be burning those bridges and causing some problems as a result. Now, those three, though, notice what they were told to do. There's a phrase in verse 1 that I think is really, really important. Part of it is go and preach my gospel, that you're on a little shaker mini mission. But did you catch how they're supposed to do it? The Lord said, go and preach my gospel, which ye have received, even as ye have received it. In other words, the way you learned should affect the way that you've taught or that you will teach. And how have you learned? Sidney, when the Lamanite missionaries came, or the missionaries on the Lamanite mission, when they came through town, did they bash you into belief? Or did they present truth with an open-ended invitation, ask God and find out for yourself? Parley, how did you receive the gospel? Nobody was pressuring you into submission. You found a copy of the Book of Mormon and couldn't put it down. And simply by being introduced to truth, it resonated with you and you accepted, you believed. Lehman, your story is a little different. You've believed in part. You didn't believe other things. You learned a fullness of the gospel and moved from one faith to the other. Will you honor people's agency and allow them to come to know the truth for themselves as well? Or will you proof text and debate and argue and dispute? In other words, will you build up or tear down? Will your missionary work be an example of construction or demolition? And Section 49 in some ways is a little hard because it is dismantling some shaker doctrines. This is where they're wrong in this, and this is where they need further light in that. Notice this, though. If you go to verse 2, the Lord says, behold, I say unto you that they desire to know the truth. That's good, but finish the statement. They desire to know the truth in part, but not all. For they are not right before me, and must needs repent. So they have some truth and some error. How are we going to respond? What are we going to do to help them move forward? If theirs is an incomplete faith, well, wait a minute. The 9th article of faith tells us that we're incomplete too. The third part of that says that there are yet many great and important things pertaining to the kingdom of God that God will yet reveal. Do we only want to know the part we have now? Or are we open to a fullness of truth that God will continue to reveal line upon line and precept upon precept? This is not just a shaker problem. This could be a problem for any of us, including those of us that claim to have the fullness of the gospel. We have some things to remain open to as well. The Lord then says in verse 4, my servant Lehman shall be ordained unto this work, that he may reason with them. Now, reason, that's interesting. That's speaking to the mind and not just to the heart. We're going to talk through some things, and perhaps Lehman better than anybody, because you used to be a part of that faith. You'll be able to build those bridges. You understand the world that they're coming out of, or the world you came out of that they're still in. But notice, reason with them, but here's the more specific counsel. Not according to that which he has received of them, but according to that which shall be taught him by you, my servants. By so doing, I will bless him, otherwise he shall not prosper. Now, think about what Lehman and Parley and Sidney are being told here. In some ways, yes, you know the Bible inside and out, Sidney, but don't Bible bash. That's not how you were converted. Parley, you're fiery and zealous. That's beautiful. And yet, don't get overzealous on these people. Simply let them have the kind of experience you did with the Word of God. Let truth fill them. You don't have to reach in and pull out all this error. Lehman, reason with them. You understand them in a way that perhaps Sidney and Parley do not. But don't reason with them in terms of what you've received from them by way of falsehood. Reason with them what you have received yourself by way of truth. Have you ever heard the statement, keep all of the truth you have, and simply come and see if we can add any to it? That was a principle taught by Joseph Smith and practically all of his prophetic successors. We are not trying to tear down what you already have. I think it was George Albert Smith that said something along those lines. You don't have to tear down the house they're in. Build a better house across the street and leave the door wide open. Let people come. And I think too often we approach our missionary labors negatively in terms of prove that they're wrong, rather than positively simply teach truth and let truth cut its own way. Sadly, how did things go on this mini mission among the Shakers? It was a disaster. They went, again, Lehman knows many of these people. They come together. Sidney offers, basically Sidney and Parley and Lehman and the leader of the Shakers kind of sit down to talk, to discuss some things. And the Shaker leader, a good man, a calm man, says, let's not try to force our doctrine upon one another. Okay, easy enough. And Sidney Rigdon actually agrees to that. Good job, Sidney. You reined yourself in. I'm not here to Bible bash. We can just share our various beliefs and let people decide for themselves. And yet, when Parley Pratt saw that Sidney was going to go the calm route of this Shaker leader, Parley was much too fiery for that. And his zeal came into overzealousness and said, no, we're not going to soft pedal things. We got to prove these people that they're wrong. We have a revelation that even says that. Now, this revelation was given to the three missionaries. Was it designed to be read verbatim to the Shaker community? I don't think so. It's a little strongly worded. How then can the missionaries take these truths and explain them in a softer, kinder, gentler, more loving way? Well, they didn't. At Parley's insistence, they read the full revelation to the entire congregation, and they didn't mince any words. This is you're wrong here, and this is where you're wrong there, and that's a false doctrine, and you only want to know things in part. You don't want to know them full. Well, that's a great way to win friends and influence people. It didn't do either. Well, it influenced them toward anger. There's disputation and contention. And they rejected the message. That only made Parley P. Pratt even angrier. And so he turned around and basically shook off the dust from his coattails. And that made the Shaker minister angrier than ever. He said, basically called Parley a beast and said, how dare you do that? Claiming to be a minister of the gospel, and basically kicked them out. Well, Parley went running. Sidney and Lehman's in tears. Sidney decides, I'll stay for dinner if it's okay with you. No hard feelings. Sorry, the things went this way. And the Shaker minister was fine allowing those two to stay for a meal. But as far as converting any Shakers, no, this little mini mission did not go according to plan. I wonder if the Lord had that in mind when he warned Lehman from the start. If you do it my way, I'll bless you. Otherwise, you shall not prosper. How are we going to share the gospel with other people? It's not going to be by tearing down their beliefs. It will simply be by presenting truth through the power of the Holy Ghost and allowing the Spirit to work within them until they know for themselves. There are better ways to share the gospel than simply proof texting and Bible bashing. And when we see the other party as a person, a child of God, then hopefully we can address them along those lines and build bridges instead of burning them down. Now, that's overarching principle. What about the specific things that we are taught in section 49? I'm not going to go through very many of them. That's, for a very short revelation, it's pretty dense as far as this doctrine, this doctrine, this doctrine. Let me bring up two of them, one in this second segment and then another one in a third. For this second one, it's going to go down to one of the most obvious traits about the Shakers. Back in those days, they were known for kind of ecstatic worship services that include really interesting dancing. Shakers was not their official title, okay? This was a united society of believers in Christ's second coming. That's a mouthful for a church too. No wonder they shortened them with nicknames. But Shaker was given as a nickname for the shaking kind of convulsive spirituality that they sometimes showed. But the most famous thing about them, again, was their celibacy. They better be good missionaries themselves because there's not going to be any children born into the community. Okay, we'll put it that way. But for this one, the Lord is going to clarify in section 49 how he feels about a belief that elevates celibacy beyond even marriage as the most important way that they should live. What we'll see in section 49 is the Lord did not agree with that. To put it in perspective, let me share an experience from my teenage years. When I was in high school, I was in an AP physics class, and our teacher was hilarious, really interesting, quirky. He was from Great Britain. Everybody loved him. But I remember at the end of the year, or almost the end of the year, we had our AP physics test, and when the test was over, for all intents and purposes, the semester was over too. The year was over. There's nothing big beyond that. We hopefully passed the test. We can move on to other things. But that we still had about a month left of school before summer vacation came. And so Mr. Kirby, our beloved physics teacher, had to decide, what do I do with that last month when all the real work has already been accomplished? Well, he was super chill, and so he just kind of let us do our own thing. And we could study for other classes, we could just hang out and talk, we could do whatever. But one of the things that he had was he had a chess set in class, and he'd be open to play chess with any students who wanted to. And I wanted to. So there were quite a few days where Mr. Kirby and I would just play chess together. And yet, while we're playing chess, we're discussing deeper things. And the ones I remember most is he always wanted to talk to me about the church and the role that Latter-day Saints played in overpopulating the planet. He didn't pull any punches. I look back and go, how did he get away with that? Talking to a teenager, one of his students, and basically chewing out this student, me, that my faith was single-handedly overpopulating the planet. So yeah, you Latter-day Saints have too many kids. It's a problem. And I basically just laughed. I said, well, I hate to break it to you, Mr. Kirby. You've had my older sister. You've had me. There's still 4 more Halversons coming your way. So brace yourself. A little mini overpopulation of your own classroom. Take that. Well, I was pretty sure of myself and my own beliefs. And so we would talk and discuss religious things right there in physics class. It was interesting. But that thought about overpopulation, and is the idea of a large family a good idea or a bad one? I can only imagine if I were in his class today, and we'd probably be digging into deeper issues about traditional families versus the other ways that families are organized. We'd be talking about LGBT issues and those kinds of marital perspectives. Who knows if we could get away with those kinds of conversations at all? But I want you to look at section 49 because there is a principle here that we Latter-day Saints feel very passionately about. Some of the language right here is basically echoed in the Proclamation to the World on the Family that was issued a century and a half later. But the issue here has to do with marriage and children and human intimacy. The irony here is that often the Shakers that we're meeting in 49, the Latter-day Saints, which we've been studying all along, and a third group, the Oneida community, are often grouped together as three examples of abnormal marital norms in 19th century America. Those three interesting bedfellows, but they're always put together because of Latter-day Saints, that polygamy, because of Shakers, celibacy, and because the Oneida community believes in what they called complex marriage, which was this idea that we're going to be a communitarian settlement that has everything in common, including one another's husbands and wives. We're all going to eat in the same kitchen and live under the same roof and share each other in all ways, including the intimate ones, okay? Interesting things happening in mid-19th century America as they're trying to figure out what the future of family life should look like. Now, plural marriage is still years away for the Latter-day Saints. What I love about section 49 is we have a snapshot in time of the marital norms that God intends for his people, okay? With that in mind, look at section 49, verse 15 through 17. Again, verily I say unto you, that whoso forbiddeth to marry is not ordained of God. Now, he's not calling out the Shakers by name, but he might as well have. They forbid to marry. They believe in celibacy, and that's the only way we're supposed to live together. So the Lord weighs in on that and says, that didn't come from me. That came from Ann Lee and other Shaker leaders. For marriage is ordained of God unto man. And that's language, like I said, that we do see in the proclamation. God gifts us marriage. It's ordained of him. It's how he wants the human family to be organized. He goes on, wherefore it is lawful that he should have one wife, and they twain shall be one flesh, and all this that the earth might answer the end of its creation, and that it might be filled with the measure of man, according to his creation before the world was made. Now, like I said, Shakerism believed in celibacy, so they would not have agreed with this part of the revelation. When Sidney and Parley read the whole thing out to this Shaker community, yeah, they would have, the hackles would have come up once they quoted that one. Could there have been softer ways of teaching these things? One would hope. But what's interesting to me, like I said, here is established very clearly the Lord's norms for marriage. And did you notice, for example, first of all, it's ordained of God. Marriage is a divine institution. This is not something merely man-made, that we came up with it and said, well, we might as well join men and women and be able to have children, and let's make it more of a set commitment. It'll give some social stability to society and so on. That's all true. But as far as the Lord is concerned, it was his idea, not humankind's. If you go back to Genesis and see the Lord make sure that Adam understands it is not good for you to be alone. Men and women need helps meet for one another. You need to be equal partners in a marriage relationship that is meant to be eternal. Notice, for example, that first marriage was performed before the fall, which means God could not have said, till death do you part, because death was not in anyone's vocabulary yet. Okay? So, ordained of God, first thing. Second thing, it's lawful that a man should have one wife. Now, that's going to be really important for Latter-day Saints because we know the future is going to include plural marriage. But plural marriage is the exception. Right here in section 49, we get the rule. Joseph Smith was crystal clear on that himself. And he said, I have always taught monogamy is the rule. Polygamy is simply the exception. And it's in exceptional circumstances with a clear commandment from God to his prophet. That is the only time that plural marriage is permitted. Jacob in the Book of Mormon would say the same thing in Jacob chapter 2. Monogamy is the rule. Polygamy is the exception. Third thing to realize, When it says that they twain shall be one flesh, there's marital intimacy. And that is something that is ordained of God as well. That this is something that God gives us by way of gift within marriage, so that husband and wife can become one in all ways, physical, spiritual, emotional. That oneness, that unity, they're no more twain, they are one. In fact, they are one to the point that they can bring life into the world. It is a creative connection that really is a gift from God. It's not a matter of, well, better to marry than to burn, as we read in the letters of Paul. It's not plug your nose at the thought of human intimacy, but I guess as long as it's protected within marriage, we'll turn a blind eye. No, God does want the twain to become one, the two to become one, including one flesh. The other thing to see, by the way, is when he says, this is so that the earth can answer the end of its creation. What's the world for? It's a place for us to form families. This is the divine role of marriage and intimacy within the plan of our heavenly parents, plural. There is something beautiful, there is something divine, there is something foreordained about the earth becoming a place where we can come to create families. We see this at the end of Malachi 4, that without the possibility of eternal families and hearts turning from fathers to children and back, the earth would be utterly wasted at the Lord's coming. Or to put it in another way, what an utter waste of the world if it's not a place to create families. The world is meant to be a forest of family trees, and marriage is key to all of that. Take that, Mr. Kirby. I wish I would have understood these revelations a little bit better when I was in high school. If we can understand the beauty and the gift and the power of marriage, then we will see that it is truly ordained of God, and that it is God that determines the kinds of marriages that he will allow and honor. These are hard doctrines for some. They should be hard doctrines for us all if we love the people for whom these doctrines are hard. So I hope that we can be careful as we teach these things, as we share them with people for whom these kinds of truths might not be second nature. I hope that we can be gentle, that we can be spirit-directed, that we can be empathetic in terms of where they're coming from as we teach them the things that we've learned from God. We'll see a need for that clarified in a moment when we get to section 50. But before we get there, though, one more principle I want to teach from section 49, among the many that we could be studying. For this next one, and this was hard. There were several that I was tempted to teach instead. But let me talk about this one because I think it is a more broad-based one that will find multiple applications for each of us. Have you ever studied food chains? I remember when I was young learning that in science class, and this is eaten by this, who's eaten by that, and you're working your way up the food chain. It's pretty fascinating. As you go from prey all the way up to predator, and ultimately to apex predator. Who's the one that only eats and never seems to get eaten? Well, there's some argument on this on both sides, but many people seem to feel that the ultimate apex predator, the one that does the most damage down below through the food chain, are human beings. We look in the mirror and see how public enemy number one to much of the animal kingdom and to much of the environment itself. Now, this can be tricky, but if you notice what the Lord says to the Shakers and to the Latter-day Saints in section 49, look at verse 18 and 19. He says, "Whoso forbiddeth to abstain from meats," and that's really confusing. To forbid, to abstain, is that a double negative? What am I supposed to make of that? If you look at this, the footnote, it clarifies. Whoso biddeth to abstain. So you're making a rule that you have to abstain from meat, okay? Let's read it that way. Whoso biddeth to abstain from meats, that man should not eat the same, is not ordained of God. For behold, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air and that which cometh of the earth is ordained for the use of man, for food and for raiment, and that he might have in abundance. Now, I know a lot of you out there that love to barbecue just heaved a sigh of relief, like, whew, okay, thank you, section 49. I've got a new favorite revelation. Yes, it's okay to eat meat. Here, by the way, it's not saying you're wrong to be a vegetarian or a vegan. In some ways, when he's talking about you shouldn't be out there forcing your beliefs on people, you shouldn't bid to abstain, I think that should go both ways. You shouldn't force a meat eater into vegetarianism, but you shouldn't force a vegetarian into eating meat. Live and let live, in some ways, is what's being described here. In this particular instance, Shakers, many of them, believed in a strict vegetarianism. Okay, there's beautiful things about the Shaker faith. And the communitarian ideal is a beautiful thing. The sense of being at one with each other and one with the earth is a beautiful thing. And so not wanting to cause problems with the animal kingdom, they're going to hold themselves back. That's a beautiful thing. But to preach it that is the doctrine and that you're not allowed to eat meat, that's not the message of God either. Not in section 49 and not even back in Genesis when humankind are given dominion over the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air and the fish of the sea. The way we're seeing it here, they are ordained for the use of man, both for food and for raiment. In fact, to have it in abundance. But let's pause for a moment. And if we're looking for Goldilocks zones and proving contraries and finding balance, if on one extreme it is putting humanity at the service of the animal kingdom where we can't touch anything, that we're here and we're ruining the planet, and so we should wipe off the human race, and then the earth itself will be in far better condition without us. That's too far of an extreme towards that kind of environmentalism. But is there an opposite extreme where the environment is simply something to be exploited for human consumption far beyond what is sustainable and wise? How do we find this balance? I'm not going to force vegetarianism on people, but at the opposite extreme, we'll see this in the word of wisdom. Are we eating meat sparingly? Are we being careful? Are we being sustainable? All these kinds of things. Wise stewards over planet Earth and not acting as if we own the place ourselves with no consequence. In fact, if you read verse 18 and 19, which we just did, now pivot to 20 and 21. But, okay, so he's trying to help us correct without overcorrecting. The but right there is trying to keep us from swinging the pendulum too far on the other side. So yes, it's ordained for man. It's meant to be had in abundance, but it is not given that one man should possess that which is above another. Wherefore the world lieth in sin, and woe be unto man that sheddeth blood or that wasteth flesh and hath no need. Oh, there's an important correction. We want to avoid overcorrection. But like I said, do we see the earth as something where we have stewardship and not outright ownership? This idea of the world lying in sin, because two things. On the one hand, we are trying to get above one another. The Shakers were better than us at that. Okay, remember the saints are being prepared to live the law of consecration, which in some ways is moving in a Shaker direction. They're good at communitarianism. We've got a lot to learn from them. But don't overswing it. Find some way to balance a use of the abundance of the earth, but not in such a way that we are sinners in the way that we exploit it. I want to get more of those natural resources so that I can be above my brothers and sisters. That is going to lead to an exploitation of Mother Earth that is unsustainable. And the other part of wasting flesh when you have no need, that's something we need to be careful about as well. So my hope as we study this and ponder it in our own circumstance is, how do we find that middle ground? How do we have dominion as the Lord intended, but as stewards with consequences in mind? In fact, let me show you something that might be of note to you. Back in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, Adam and Eve were told to be fruitful and multiply and have dominion over fish and fowls and flesh and all of those things. But then when you fast forward to Genesis chapter 9, we are now with Noah and his family. And Noah is Adam 2.0, a new beginning. We're going to create a new earth after the flood. And in fact, just like their ancestors, Noah and his family were told to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Same idea. But then notice this difference. Instead of saying dominion, it says the fear of you and the dread of you will be among the fowls of the air and the fish of the sea and every animal that creepeth upon the earth. That's interesting. In the Edenic state, yes, humankind has dominion over the earth. In a post-fallen world, and a post-flood world at that, yes, you'll have dominion, but will it be because the animal kingdom fears you? Will it be because Mother Nature dreads you? And that's something we need to be aware of. I hope that our environmentalism is on par with our desire to be good stewards. I hope that we understand the gift that God has given us in Mother Earth. And if we remember the visions of Enoch, the earth's own spirit, hoping we will care for her and do it well. Were the Shakers too far on one extreme? Is the modern world too far on the other? Well, we've got some middle ground to seek. And I hope we'll have the Holy Spirit helping us find that middle ground. In some ways, that's what section 50 is there for, to teach us how to seek the Spirit as we are learning to discern between tugs and pulls that would lead us in opposite directions. Section 50 is a powerful revelation. And more than anything in it, it's trying to help the saints know what's truth and what isn't. We're going to have to get better at discerning those things ourselves. In fact, when in my BYU classes, especially my second half of the Book of Mormon class, I actually assign my students a personal project to be able to work on some of these things. I call it the False Philosophies Project. In every semester that I teach the second half of the Book of Mormon, I teach Korihor right off the bat. He's one of the first characters that we meet in the second half of the Book of Mormon. And Korihor is a perfect embodiment of the falsehoods of the world. Here you have him sign-seeking and then teaching falsehood and hoping that the people will listen to him instead of the prophet Alma. Now, when I study Alma and Korihor with my BYU students, I assign them this personal project that's called the False Philosophies Project. And in it, I ask them to be really intuitive, really observant, go online, search for some of the false philosophies that are out there, and then be sufficiently self-aware to recognize the ones that are affecting your perspective. I mean, there's all kinds of isms out there. And whether it is secular humanism, whether it's moral relativism, whether it's determinism or nihilism or hedonism, which ones are affecting the way you look at the world? And it's been interesting to get feedback from students over the years that sometimes, for many of them, that's their favorite project of the semester because it's so eye-opening. They will study moral relativism, for example, and come away realizing, oh no, I'm a full-fledged moral relativist. Or they'll see the worldly philosophy of a radical individualism, where it's me and I can do anything I want and I'm not responsible for anyone else. And it's like, whoa, I don't know if I'd put it in those extreme terms, but yeah, I think I've lived my life too far on the individualistic end of the spectrum. For others, it's, yep, commercialism was my ism, and I have fallen for it hook, line, and sinker. So how do I overcome this? Well, like I said, the first step is recognizing the false philosophy that you are falling prey to. And once we see it, is there a better truth to combat that particular error? Now, we just left section 49, and this the shakerism that the Lord was teaching the saints about. But like I said earlier, it's only a few years away from this era of manifestations that shakerism was a part of. The saints are now coming out of the Second Great Awakening with all kinds of spiritual manifestations. And yet, are they manifestations from God or from some other source? Remember section 46, doctrines of devils, commandments of men. Where are these things coming from? Well, look at section 50, the way it begins. Verse 1, 2, and 3. Hearken, O ye elders of my church, and give ear to the voice of the living God, and attend to the words of wisdom, which shall be given unto you. This is not the word of wisdom about health codes, but just wise words that I'm trying to convey. According as ye have asked and are agreed as touching the church and the spirits which have gone abroad in the earth. So that's what was on the saints' mind. I see all kinds of stuff going on. People claiming spiritual experiences left and right. But is that really a spirit? Well, there's spirits out there, but what spirit is behind these experiences? The Lord says, Behold, verily I say unto you that there are many spirits which are false spirits, which have gone forth in the earth, deceiving the world. And also Satan hath sought to deceive you, that he might overthrow you. So yes, many spirits, some are false, which means others are true. That's the good news. But how do you avoid deception? If you remember, when we look at Joseph Smith Matthew, which is the JST of Matthew 24, Signs of the Times Central, what becomes the defining sign of the last days? The deception of the very elect according to the covenant. That's the one that keeps getting repeated. The Lord warns the saints about false Christs and false prophets and false teachers. It's earthquakes in diverse places and not just the literal kind. Are we falling for falsehood? Are we succumbing to the counterfeits and we can't recognize what's true from what isn't? Here the Lord is warning them about deception. And in fact, he says in verse 4, Behold, I, the Lord, have looked upon you and have seen abominations in the church that profess my name. Oh, okay, so some of these deceptions are actually working because I look at my own church, my own people, and I see abominations there. That's a problem. What falsehoods are we falling for? What false philosophies have we imbibed to the point of living our lives by something that isn't true? Now, I want to point out something grammatical in verse 4 that I think is a little odd. If you were to type this in, I think spell check or grammar check would pop up and say you've written something wrong here. Because it says that I've seen abominations in the church that profess my name. Wait, church is singular. Wouldn't it be the church that professes my name? If you got a singular noun, you got to have a singular verb. Then again, is church a singular noun? Well, yeah, because churches would be plural. Well, true. But what's interesting in grammar, there are some words that could function as both singular or plural, depending on what you're trying to emphasize. Think about a band, for example. A band is a single musical group, but it's made of multiple players. And so you could actually use the band is playing or the band are playing, which sounds a little weird, but it's grammatically correct based on, am I emphasizing the collective band or the individual members of it? I'm actually really grateful that even though church seems like a singular noun, profess is a plural verb, which means the better way to read this correctly is the Lord has seen abominations in the church members that profess my name. Some people don't quite get it. And they've been deceived by some of these spiritual counterfeits out there. And there are abominations being manifest because of their deception. We have to guard against that. But that's an individual thing more than an institutional thing. Now, what kinds of abominations are we talking about? Look at verse 6. Deceivers and hypocrites. And yes, hypocrisy is one of the worst forms of deception. He links the two together in verse 7. There are hypocrites among you who have deceived some, which has given the adversary power. Hypocrisy. I want people to think I'm better than I am. I want to show some of these spiritual gifts myself. Wait, other people have gifts? Remember, we just studied section 46. Seek the best ones. Ooh, well, I want the best gift so I can be seen as the best person. And if I don't have those actual gifts, can I fake it? Can I fake it till I make it? Can I try to lead people to perceive in me some kind of giftedness that I don't actually have? Oh, careful. That kind of hypocrisy is deceptive, and it gives the adversary power. When they see someone faking spiritual gifts, they are likely to doubt the real gifts even when they're present. It's okay to admit that you don't have all the gifts. I certainly don't. Section 46 said it would be that way. That's why we need each other. Can we avoid hypocrisy then and deception, especially in spiritual matters? Now, what happens to those deceptive hypocrites? Look at verse 6. I will bring them to judgment. Or verse 8, the hypocrites shall be detected and shall be cut off. But if that's the bad news for the perpetrators of this deception, is there any good news for the victims? Yes. Look at verse 7. What happens to those who have been deceived? Such shall be reclaimed. And I am so grateful for that, so relieved by that. Again, if one of the signs of the times of the last days is the deception of the very elect according to the covenant, then yes, there will be church members that succumb to false philosophies and fall away from the faith. That is not the only reason people fall away from the faith. There are some abominations within us that are driving people away, and that's on us, and that's got to change. We have to overcome that hypocrisy and that deception. We have to live up to the standards God has set for us. We have to live the doctrine, the beautiful doctrine that God has revealed. So yes, there's changes that we need to make, but there are also recognitions that people need to make of the false philosophies that they have imbibed and the falsehood that they are seeing as true and living their lives by. I am so relieved by this reassurance that such will be reclaimed. But it makes me want to engage in the reclamation. Can I teach truth clearly enough and lovingly enough that people can see the falsehood by comparing it to the true? Can I present it in such a way that the mistakes of these false philosophies become so clear among those who have been deceived by them that they can overcome their own deception? That's the hope that I have. And how do we get there? How do we help them get there? One last verse for you. What two? Look at verse 5. Blessed are they who are faithful and endure, whether in life or in death, for they shall inherit eternal life. And then verse 9. Wherefore let every man beware, lest he do that which is not in truth and righteousness before me. You see the keys there to navigate these days of deception? If we will be aware of what's out there and try to find the source of those philosophies, and is it rooted in revelation? Is it grounded in gospel truth or not? Can we live in truth? Can we live in righteousness? Can we be faithful? And can we endure whatever philosophies are bombarding us? Welcome to the last days, my friends. This is what we're up against. If we will pray for eyes to see and hearts to discern, we'll be able to see what comes from God and what does not. We will be on our guard, and God will lead us in the direction he wants us to go. I am grateful for truth, and I pray that it helps us navigate a day of counterfeit and error. Now, how to do that? It's going to take a lot of good teaching on our part, a lot of good learning on our part too, which makes it all the more fitting that what the Lord then teaches us in section 50 is about teaching and learning. And the most important part of it all, teaching and learning by the Spirit of God. For any of you teachers out there, and yes, we got to stick together. Question for you. How do you know when you're teaching by the Spirit? We all want to. That's our dream. We want the power of God and the convincing of our students. That's section 11, right? We want to be able to teach with power and authority. That's Alma 17, right? Well, how do I know when I'm teaching by the Spirit? When I was a brand new seminary teacher in training, I remember this guidebook that we had that was kind of instruction manual for how to teach the gospel of Jesus Christ. And when it talked about teaching by the Spirit, there was a phrase there that really stood out to me. It said, teaching by the Spirit is when the teacher feels the Spirit, or the student feels the Spirit, or both. Now, I'd only considered the both. And yes, that's ideal. Ideally, both teacher and student are on the same wavelength. And we'll see that wavelength described in section 50. But it was comforting to realize there may be times where my students seem totally disengaged. It's not resonating with any of them, but I'm feeling the power of God, and maybe that lesson was just for me. Now, hopefully there's not too many of those in a row, or you've just lost your classroom. But in terms of I could be teaching by the Spirit because I was open to it and I was in tune. And I'm not at the mercy of someone else's agency or openness. Or flip it around. That's an interesting scenario also. There may be times where as a teacher, and there have been times in my own case, where at the end of a lesson I thought, man, that was a dumpster fire. What was wrong with my lesson today? I thought I prepared well. I prayed about it. I tried to prepare as best I could. I tried to teach, but I felt nothing. And yet sometimes there'll be students coming up after one of those lessons saying, oh, thank you so much. This is exactly what I needed to hear today. And I thought, whoa, really? And what I thought was a failure was for them a beautiful gift. It shows that they were in tune with the Spirit and they received something independent of what I thought I was trying to give them. Interesting. Now, like I said, best case scenario, both teacher and student are feeling the Spirit of God, and we're teaching that way. And if you look at section 50, starting in verse 13, that's God's ideal as well. He says, wherefore I, the Lord, ask you this question. Unto what were ye ordained? Like, what'd you sign on for? Why did we call you? What were you meant to accomplish? And then he answers his own question. To preach my gospel by the Spirit, even the Comforter, which was sent forth to teach the truth. And then receive ye spirits, which ye could not understand, and receive them to be of God, and in this are ye justified? Oh, behold, ye shall answer this question yourselves. Nevertheless, I will be merciful unto you. He that is weak among you hereafter shall be made strong. Now, there's a lot I just read there in 13 through 16, but see what he's trying to explain here. If we work our way backwards, for example, the church is young. We're just getting off the ground here. And on the heels of the Second Great Awakening, shortly before the Shaker era of manifestations, Joseph Smith grew up in what they called the burned over district. The fires of faith were spreading like wildfire. But sometimes people got singed with something that wasn't exactly Spirit of God. Some people would even joke, they said, oh yeah, there's spirits there, but is it of the intoxicating kind? What's going on at some of these revival meetings? And the Lord is saying at the end there, I'm merciful to you. I will take those weak things and turn them into strong things for you, if you'll come. I know the church is young, and you've swung a pendulum away from the spiritual tyranny that said there are no gifts anymore. But have you overswung the pendulum to think that every manifestation is some kind of spiritual gift? And that might not be the case. Okay? I'll be merciful. Now, how are you going to decide where this middle ground is? I love that he uses comprehension as one of his criteria. When he says, you receive these spirits and you could not understand, but you thought they were from God. I mean, something's going on. Comprehension as a criteria is, am I understanding something? Am I learning truth? Is there light and not just heat? Are things beginning to make sense? Is God speaking to the mind as well as the heart? Almost as fail-safe epistemologically, that this is something that does indeed come from God. You see, after all, if you're supposed to be preaching by the Spirit, the Comforter, that's going to teach truth and guide you to truth, everything Jesus taught back in John chapter 13 and 14 and 15 in the New Testament, this Comforter he will send to guide you to truth, to ratify revelation. And by the way, I love when he says, I'm going to let you answer this question yourselves. I'm merciful. I'm not going to confront you with that. I'm just going to let you think about this and really ponder. Allow time to have its work to help you make sense of these experiences that you're seeing all around you. Are they really gifts from God? Now he's going to say in verse 17 through 20, verily I say unto you, he that is ordained of me and sent forth to preach the word of truth by the Comforter in the Spirit of truth, doth he preach it by the Spirit of truth or some other way? If it be some other way, it is not of God. And then, if that was on the giver end, now let's look at the receiver end. Again, he that receiveth the word of truth, doth he receive it by the Spirit of truth or some other way? If it be some other way, it is not of God. Now, that's as good as it gets right there. Both giver and receiver, both teacher and learner. Are you teaching by the Spirit? Are you learning by the Spirit? Or is it some other way? You teachers, are you trusting too much in the arm of flesh or the arm of flash? Are you sensationalizing? Or are you striving to teach simple gospel truths by the Spirit of God? You receivers, are you demanding? I mean, sometimes this is supply and demand, and the teachers are supplying because you're demanding something that seems far more entertaining than simple gospel truth. Are you these? If it's not a tear-jerking story, then I'm not going to show up for class. Or if it's not sufficiently philosophical and deep enough, we can go off the rails in either direction. Which is why I love the Lord's clarification. There's really only two ways to teach and learn. A right way and a wrong way. That's just two. There's binary for you. The right way, what is it? Through the power of God, through the Spirit of truth. What's the wrong way? Everything else. Now, the Spirit will work through your personality. The Spirit will work through your spiritual gifts, and those are unique to each teacher and learner. But be true to those true gifts and true principles. Beware of the other ways we might be relying on. And if we can simply trust the power of truth, the power of the Spirit, and the openness of one another to receive it, I think it'll change the way we teach. It will improve it. And what will the result be? Look at verse 21 and 22. Therefore, why is it that ye cannot understand and know? Again, I want you to get this. I need you to understand. Comprehension as a criteria for truth. And here's what I need you to get. That he that receiveth the word by the Spirit of truth, receiveth it as it is preached by the Spirit of truth. Wherefore he that preacheth and he that receiveth understand one another, and both are edified and rejoice together. That's the key. That's the ultimate criteria. How is this teaching and learning taking place? The Spirit is the middle ground. The Spirit is what is translating truth from the spirit of the speaker to the spirit of the hearer. Honestly, I know you've all felt this, whether as a teacher or a student yourself. When you're on the same wavelength, when it's just clicking and what they're saying is resonating within you in a way that you know that that's coming from God, or as a teacher, you see that it's resonating with students, or they're sharing comments or insights or asking questions that are so exactly in line with what you feel guided to teach, whoa, God is here. His Spirit is guiding this discussion, this conversation, this lecture, this lesson, whatever it might be. And what's the result of it? I mean, this is, from my old football days, this is when the quarterback and the receiver on the same wavelength. You can almost read each other's minds, and the quarterback throws it where he knows the receiver is going to be, and you're there to catch it. This is the guard and center with the perfect pick and roll, because they read each other and they know exactly where they're going to be. If sports isn't your thing. This is the jazz ensemble that is riffing on each other, and it's improv, but it's beautiful. And you all felt in the same flow. This is the actor and actress that are in a scene, and it's improvisational too, but they just seem to be reading each other's minds and finishing each other's sentences. This is a good marriage. This is an amazing companionship in the mission field. This is a classroom of connection where teaching and learning becomes relational, and two are becoming one. How did he put it? They understand one another. Both are edified. They rejoice together. I can't imagine a better teaching and learning experience. Mutual comprehension, mutual edification, and mutual joy. When that takes place between teachers and learners, God is in the classroom and real learning has occurred. My dream is that that's happening even now. That you're understanding me. I wish I could see through the camera and connect with you. If that is happening and we are rejoicing together, if we get it, if it's making sense and we're edifying one another, there are times where I can feel God edifying me through the teaching as I'm saying things I had not planned on, praying that they are connecting to at least one of you out there in ways that you'll recognize. It's beautiful what the Lord is laying out here. But there's two other things that I want to bring out in section 50 before we finish this week. And some of this has to do with teaching and learning also. Some of this has to do with increasing in our understanding. In fact, this next one has to do with that. It's a very simple metaphor the Lord uses. It's one of his favorites, by the way, one of his favorite metaphors for who he is and what he's trying to do with us. But it's also put into a perspective of change and progress and growth over time. So I want to see together what the Lord is trying to lay out for us here. For this, I want you to ponder times when you're not exactly sure what time it is. Let me dramatize it this way. Have you ever been sick and you took a nap, but you weren't sure if it was a nap or actually sleeping for the night? Where you slept and you wake up and you're still so groggy and out of it that you don't know if it was a little quick half an hour or if you slept overnight. Let's say you look at the clock and it says 7. And then you look out the window and it's kind of bright but kind of dark and you're like, oh, is this 7 a.m. or 7 p.m.? Is this dusk or dawn? Can't tell. Now again, 7 on the clock isn't going to help you anything. But if you looked and it said 12 and then you looked out the window, I would really hope you can tell if it's 12 a.m. or 12 p.m. It's not dusk or dawn. It is midnight or noon. And that should be crystal clear. If it's not, you're really sick. Okay? Now, there's a verse in the Book of Mormon, in Moroni chapter 7, where Mormon describes discerning truth and error and makes it such an easy choice that he says one is like the daylight and the other is like the dark night. Now, my hat's off to you, Mormon, that for you, discerning truth and error is so crystal clear that it's a high noon, midnight kind of differentiation. Unfortunately, my choices don't always seem to be that clear. And there are times where I'm caught more at a 7 than a 12, caught between dusk and dawn, and I can't really tell what time it is. Well, you know what would help me in those kinds of moments? Be patient and wait. Because if it's getting brighter, it must be 7 a.m. If it's getting darker, it must be 7 p.m. In other words, if I can't always tell in the moment if this is truth or error, be patient and give it some time and ponder where it leads. And will it lead toward greater darkness? Or will it lead toward greater light? That will help me recognize truth from error. That seems to be what the Lord is hinting at in section 50, verse 23 to 25. He says, that which doth not edify is not of God, and is darkness. That which is of God is light. Now, stop there, and you're thinking, okay, I'm supposed to recognize darkness from light. Mormon says it's easy. I don't always have that gift. But then notice what he says next. He that receiveth light and continueth in God receiveth more light, and that light groweth brighter and brighter until the perfect day. And again, verily I say unto you, and I say it that you may know the truth, that you may chase darkness from among you. That's how I can discern. Where does this lead? Where will it take me? If I'm assuming this is light and I receive it and I continue in it, do things become brighter still? Does it get me closer and closer to God? Mormon actually gives us that insight in Moroni 7 also. If it's of God, it will edify. Isn't that what he just said? If it doesn't edify, it's not of God. God always leaves us better. Play the long game. Be patient and watch what he's doing with you. But that clarity, that understanding will grow brighter and brighter unto the perfect day. It's not just an on-off switch, it's a dimmer switch, and God is trying to intensify the illumination. If we'll simply lean into it, live into it, we'll understand better than we did. We'll be closer to God than we once were. This is how we grow. To me, there's something beautiful about allowing movement to clarify. I remember a great conversation with a class once where we were talking about, are your choices more black and white or are they more shades of gray? And most students admitted, it seems like a lot of shades of gray. And I said, okay, well, what do you make of Mormons, black, white, night, dark, that kind of thing? And I don't know. Does it just have to be on a higher level and then it becomes crystal clear? Maybe. But then I said, imagine this. If it's all shades of gray, isn't one extreme the light and the other extreme the darkness? Well, if I'm at a distance and looking all of this as if it was just kind of theoretical, then yeah, I guess I can see the entire broad spectrum. But let's make it personal. And let's actually get on the spectrum itself and then have a choice to make. And ask yourself this. Here I am caught in the middle of all these options and it sure seems like a ton of shades of gray. Fine. If I make that decision though, where will it lead? Where is it moving me? Toward God or away from him? Toward light or toward darkness? And again, looking at the movement here, progression or regression, is it growing brighter or darker? Now I know. Yes, in the moment it might be a shade of gray, but over time, is this drawing me in one direction or the other? If we can look to that, we will have a better idea of which direction we're headed in. We'll have a better idea of what is coming from God and what is coming from something else. And if it's something else, then we can chase that darkness away. I'm so grateful for the phrase that the Lord uses here. It grows brighter and brighter unto the perfect day. So if we are seeking that kind of perfection, follow the light. And Jesus, who is the light of the world, will illuminate the path ahead of us. And as we move in that direction, brighter and brighter, clearer and clearer, we will someday be surrounded, swallowed up in his perfect light. I've got a long way to go before I get there. I'm still got some dark corners that I'm trying to chase away. But I'm grateful that the Lord is patient with me in the process. And for this final point I'm trying to make this week, it's that patience I am so deeply grateful for. Because we're still learning. We're still figuring this thing out. In fact, we're little children, which is exactly how the Father sees us. And I'm grateful for that. Sometimes I joke with my wife that when our kids do something, less than ideal, I'll sometimes say to her, well, you know it's your fault, right, honey? She's like, what? Oh, great. Joke coming on? I'm like, well, in a way, it's your fault that you gave birth to them 25 years prematurely. She's like, what? I'm like, yeah, the brain is not fully formed until around age 25. But a fully formed brain and a fully formed cranium would never make it through the birth canal. So instead of giving birth to fully formed children, we had to give birth to them 25 years immature, okay? Or premature. Take your pick on that. Well, she rolls her eyes and says, I don't even know if your brain is fully formed and you're 50. You should have a doubly formed brain by now. Come on, honey. But again, it's my way of just kind of joking myself into being patient with my children and realizing it's a matter of time. They're figuring it out. They are growing up, and that's okay. Be patient with the process and let them learn. Now, I am so grateful that God is patient with our process and that he lets us learn, including learning from our own mistakes. It's those growing pains that come along with growing up in God. Now, that phrase is going to become famous at the dedicatory prayer of the Kirtland Temple. That's one of the things Joseph prays for, to grow up in God. But here, the Lord has dropped a hint that we do have a lot of growing up to do. If you look at section 50, verse 40 and 41, he says, behold, ye are little children, and ye cannot bear all things now. Ye must grow in grace and in the knowledge of the truth. But then this reassurance, fear not, little children, for you are mine, and I have overcome the world, and you are of them that my Father hath given me. The Lord is not being demeaning here by calling us little kids. He's not telling us, oh, well, you were born eons premature, spiritually speaking. No, it's simply a recognition of where we stand in relation to him, which is in our spiritual infancy. And yet divinity in embryo, that the Lord is trying to nurture us into full growth. The fact he's so patient, you can't bear all things now. You're going to get some things wrong. You're going to fall for some counterfeits, and you'll embrace some false philosophies. And I'll be patient with you all. I'll be merciful because you're learning. We'll turn up the dimmer switch if you just keep coming unto me. You'll grow brighter and brighter. It'll make more sense as you go. You can't bear everything now. So I'm giving you a line and seeing how you do with it. And then I'll give you another line. Ponder this precept, and you'll be ready for another precept down the road. You're mine. The Father has given you to me, and I will patiently lead you along. In fact, the way he says it in 42 to 44, how's this for reassurance? None of them that my Father hath given me shall be lost. And the Father and I are one. I am in the Father, and the Father in me. And inasmuch as ye have received me, ye are in me, and I in you. Wherefore I am in your midst, and I am the good shepherd, and the stone of Israel. He that buildeth upon this rock shall never fall. If that's not reassuring, I don't know what is. I am one with the Father, and I'm trying to be one with you. That's what my at-one-ment is for. The Father has given you to me, and I'm holding you in the arms of safety. You're within my redeeming reach, and if you'll just stay with me, I will bring you home. I will help you grow up in God because you'll be growing up in me. I'm the good shepherd, and so I'm patient with my sheep. I will gently lead you along. What can you bear now? And how can I increase your carrying capacity for later? I am the stone of Israel. And if you'll simply be a wise enough man or woman to build upon the rock, then you'll never fall. I'll be here for you. If we can understand and embrace that reassurance from the Redeemer himself, then I think we'll be a little bit more patient with ourselves as well as more patient with each other. And I think that's the hope that the Lord has for all of us in the revelations that we've studied this week. There were things that we didn't have time to cover. I hope that you'll spend some extra time covering them yourself. And to help you with that, here is our list of one-liners from 49 and 50. In part, but not all. Reason with them. All are under sin. Holy men that ye know not of. Marriage is ordained of God. Answer the end of its creation. Filled with the measure of man. Continue in steadfastness. Zion shall flourish. You shall not be confounded. Attend to the words of wisdom. Deceiving the world. Abominations in the church. Deceivers and hypocrites. Such shall be reclaimed. Let us reason together. Unto what were ye ordained? Preach my gospel by the Spirit. I will be merciful. The Spirit of truth. Some other way. Both are edified and rejoice together. That which doth not edify is not of God. Brighter and brighter until the perfect day. Chase darkness from among you. The light and the life, the Spirit and the power, cleansed from all sin. Not with railing accusation. Account it of God. Strengthen them by the word of exhortation. Grow in grace. Fear not, little children. You are mine. I am the good shepherd and the stone of Israel. I hope that we have heard the voice of the good shepherd in our study this week. I hope that as a result of the points that we've pondered in these revelations, that we are approaching the Lord's standard of gospel instruction. I hope that we are rejoicing together. I hope that we are mutually edified. I pray that what we are doing together is acceptable to God and a blessing to you. I'm honored to be able to join you in these studies. And like I said, mutual comprehension, mutual edification, mutual rejoicing, that's happening on my end. I pray it's happening on yours.
Thanks so much for listening to Unshaken, a proud member of the Faith Matters podcast network. You can learn more about Faith Matters and check out our other shows at faithmatters.org.